Good morning, class. So our second lecture is called The Horse Through the Eyes of an Equine Scientist. Should come up as lecture number 2 in the lecture files on Canvas. So the front page is just the title. Kind of tells you what we're going to talk about in this class, in addition to being a riding skills class, which is more the lab part of your class. The lecture part, when we start out here, we're talking about those of you that are taking the equine science track, that this class is something that you have to take for your major. Part of the reason you have to take it is that we look at the horse more as an agricultural commodity, more as something you are working with for a job and less as a hobby or a pastime. So when we start looking at the horse as an agricultural commodity, so like for me, I'm a trainer, I buy and sell project horses almost every year, right? So my job is to take my agricultural commodity and make it more valuable than it was when I got it, or more valuable to my audience or my customer or my client. So these first couple of slides are going to run through the different types of venues we could have for our horses, the different categories of commodity. Like, why does a horse have value in our community? The first one up here is genetic, which should be fairly self-explanatory. That means that's your breeding. So your genetic value is taking desirable bloodlines or desirable individual horses, breeding them and creating desirable offspring. And then you're going to get your return on investment by selling those offspring. The second one, phenotypic value. So that's what you see. And that is not just the genetics, so not just the papers, not just the bloodlines, but also what type of environment the manager, the equine manager, is going to provide for that horse. So as an agricultural commodity, the genetic value is more the bloodlines and like the backstory and the papers of that horse. And your phenotypic value is more, I go to look at a young horse, it has great conformation, it's built to do the job I want it to do, and because we had a good manager, it is in good weight, in good health, its feet are trimmed, it's shiny, etc. So that's your phenotype. Your phenotypic value is if people come to purchase a horse, if they want to lease a horse, or if they want to even board at your facility, if they come and the horses all look nice, like I said, they're all in good weight, good health, clear eyes, shiny coats, etc. That phenotypic value makes you more valuable to your client because it shows that you're a good manager and it shows that you have good horsemanship skills. The third one is behavior. So now we're moving more into horse training. So as an equine manager, an animal scientist managing horse behavior, which would be a trainer, if I have a client who comes to me with a horse with a behavioral problem, they want me to solve that. They want me to fix that. So as a trainer, my job is to do behavior manipulation. I want to manipulate that horse, essentially, to do the behaviors that I want and to not do the behaviors that I don't want. So I want to make the undesirable behaviors extinct, and I want to bring out or reinforce the behaviors that I want. So this is, horses for competition or horses performing work. If you think about draft horses performing work, we want to train them how to be in harness, how to pull, how to do work for us. On the next slide, we're going to continue. Number 4, the fourth value that we could assign to a horse is companion value, which could be the horse in your backyard that you just want to look at and pet. And that is a value of a horse. Some people want horses just for that reason. But also talking about equine assisted therapy. And I know that we've got a track at River Falls now that goes through equine assisted therapy and will also certify you. So talking about not only physical therapy, but also emotional therapy. And horses have been used for like people with PTSD, for war veterans coming back. It's kind of a newer area of research, even though it's been around for a while. It's growing and expanding. It's expanded at River Falls even since I was a student there. Now there's a track you can take to do equine assisted therapy. And then the 5th value is carcass value. That horses are a livestock animal. They can be used, we can use their meat for different nutritional purposes. They have been used for cosmetics, other byproducts like the PMSG, pregnant mare serum gonadotropin, which is there's different ways to get that now where the foals are not like an unwanted byproduct when you do PMSG. But there are carcass values to a horse, and we can't discount the fact that that is one of the commodities that an equine can provide. So those are kind of your 5 different categories. On our next slide, it kind of outlines like your job as a horse manager. And your job as a manager somewhat depends on what area of the equine world you're in. For this class, because it is a riding class, and then we're doing this lecture portion, and we'll be focusing more on the riding aspect of it, our job as a horse manager, we're talking a little bit more about training than we are anything else. So our job as a horse manager, kind of looking at it through the eyes of a trainer, is to maximize that horse's value so that when you sell, you make money. You have to pay for all your production costs, all of your time. When you look at the horses in the picture, the one on the left here, that obviously the top horse needs a lot of work. That horse does not have a lot of value at all. But the horse on the bottom has been fed, has been worked, its feet have been trimmed, it's well presented, feet are polished, standing square. That horse has a lot of value on the bottom. So your job as a manager is to take a horse like the one at the top and produce something like the one on the bottom. The added benefit of this is that this horse has a better chance to make it in the world, a chance for better welfare. If the horse is desirable and it looks desirable and it performs desirable behaviors, somebody will want that horse. Somebody will want to pay you more money for it, and somebody will be way more inclined to provide good shelter, good water, a good home for it, a lasting home for it. Or if the person outgrows the horse or has a reason to sell, that horse will probably move on to another good home. So your job as the trainer also goes into the horse welfare aspect of it, where you're making it more likely this horse will have a good home for the rest of its life. And it just outlines on the bottom the 5 freedoms. I know you go over this in a different class, talking more about animal welfare, but it's the freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, so providing shelter or bedding, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, freedom from fear and distress, and freedom to express their normal behaviors. That last one, as we move on to the next slide, the importance of that freedom to express their behaviors. You have to understand equine behavior first if you're going to understand how your horse lives in the world, how your horse expresses itself, and kind of what they need from you as a horse manager. So knowing what normal behavior is can help you to determine how to handle that horse. Super useful when you're making decisions about how the horse is going to live. You know, does it want to be in a stall or does it want to be outside 24 hours a day? If it's in a stall 24 hours a day and it is going completely crazy, there's probably a reason for that. So making decisions about how you're going to feed and house and care for that animal, how you're going to exercise that animal, if you're in the breeding track, how you're going to manage your stallions, how often you're going to breed them, what kind of facilities you have to house them and take care of them. So you need to understand the behavior that your horse wants to express, and then how to modify how they express those behaviors through your management of their living situations. So on the next page, the general characteristics of horse behavior. Horses are a prey species. So horses eat grass, other things eat horses. So horses are always afraid that something is going to come eat them, essentially. They have that fight or flight instinct that you guys have probably all heard of. And is very prominent, and the horses don't typically fight, they flee. So the flight instinct is to do a 180 and run away really fast. And they don't care if you're on them when this happens, and they don't care if you fall off of them during the process. And that is hardwired and ingrained into every single horse. No matter how domesticated they are, they will all turn around and run. The one we overlook, people talk about fight or flight, we overlook freeze. And freeze is sort of, it goes along with learned helplessness. Freeze is something horses will do in the wild, prey species will do in the wild. It's like playing possum. They freeze up, they kind of go completely still. And the danger of this is very often overlooked. People think, oh, the horse is submissive, the horse is quiet, they're happy. If they're very still, they're not moving their lips, they're not chewing, they're not twitching their ears, and they've frozen up. what has happened is they've sort of withdrawn inside themselves and they're potentially waiting, right? So their nervous system is on high alert. It's still ready to run. And if they're frozen and something pushes them past the breaking point or startles them, then they will run. So people will mistake this for, oh, the horse is nice and calm and they're accepting what I'm doing. They'll walk in to pet the horse or do something with the horse, and that will set the horse off and it will go up in the air and rear or strike or turn around and run. And people wonder why. So fight, flight, or freeze. And freeze is something that, if you're going to be a horse trainer, something to learn more about and something to be aware of. The social characteristics of a horse are that they live in herds. Usually there is a dominant mare that kind of bosses everybody around. Usually there's a stallion that overlooks the entire grouping of horses, but they do live in groups. So if you try to put horses in isolation, that can backfire on you as well. That can be part of your horse management, that they're usually not happy alone. They're usually happier when they have a group, and they're happier when that group is somewhat established and they know their place, which is dominance hierarchy. The horse really doesn't care if they're bottom of the pack as long as they know that they are. As long as they know how to interact with the horses around them, they're very happy. They know their place, they know how to interact with their friends, they understand when it's their turn for food and water, and so the world makes sense to them. The world is black and white, and that's something that horses appreciate. Black and white. There's a right and wrong answer. There's a specific time for this or that. Like, they understand that, it makes sense, and they can function in that world. Horses, as little babies, like this cute little guy on the left, they're born precocial, which means they stand up very quickly and they are ready to move. As opposed to the term atricial, which is humans. It takes humans years to be ready to run away from a predator, or birds also. Species like that, where the mother has to take care of the young intensely for a period of time, are atricial. Precocial animals are the ones that are born, they dry themselves off, they stand up, and they're ready to move with the herd within hours of being born. And horses fall into this category. Okay, so the important behavioral categories to be aware of in horses. The first category is called agonistic behavior, which is that dominance behavior. You can see in the photo, this is probably two young stallions fighting. The agonistic behavior, so this dominance behavior, helps to establish that pecking order we were just talking about. And it usually comes out in the wild. It's when resources are not readily available, so they're fighting over a little patch of grass, or they're fighting over who gets to the water first because it's not plentiful. In captivity, you'll see this behavior when you introduce a new horse to the herd, and it's their way of determining where they fall in that pecking order. And they have to do this to a certain point. It scares people because they're afraid their horse is going to get hurt, which they might, but it is the way that they figure out who falls where on this pecking order. So with that in mind, that this is how horses determine who's on top, essentially. If you are the human interacting with that horse, you have to be the one in charge, which means sometimes you have to display a little bit of this agonistic behavior, right? That you have to ask that horse to move out of your space, require them to stand away from you, not on top of you. Require that that horse have good ground manners, require that there are rules that horse has to follow as far as where they walk by you, how they stand next to you, how they move when you ask them to, that you're in charge of where their feet are going. They're not in charge of where your feet are going. Horses with each other, you'll see them lay their ears back, extending their polos when they sort of snake their head out. They'll bite each other, they'll kick each other, they'll kind of squeal and hump their back. Any of these behaviors, and you might see them out in the pasture when you go to get your horses, those are agonistic behaviors. The second behavioral category is completely the opposite. So it's submissive, like this little cute paint foal over here with his mouth open. That's a submissive action. So young horses will do this to show, okay, you're dominant over me, I'm submissive. They open and close their mouth without showing their teeth. So they're not trying to bite the other horse, they're showing that they are submissive to the other horse. Horses, when they are acting submissive, will also retreat. So they'll turn around and go the other way to avoid a confrontation. So they'll be submissive to the other horse. You'll probably see this out in the pasture also. If you see a horse displaying agonistic behavior, you'll see another horse displaying some sort of submissive behavior. The third category, kind of a strange word, it's called epimuletic behavior, which is attention-giving behavior. So if you've ever heard of mutual grooming, that's an epimuletic behavior. As a herd animal, the horse wants to have interaction with other horses. It wants to touch or be touched by other horses. So they use their teeth and they scratch each other. They rub their heads on each other. They stand close together. Giving care or attention to the other horse is epimuletic. And on the next slide, we'll talk about epimuletic behavior, which is care-seeking. So epimuletic is giving care. Epimuletic is looking for care. So if you have a horse all by itself that is whinnying, pawing, agitated at being separated from its friends, isolated from the herd, that horse is displaying epimuletic behavior. It's looking for another horse to interact with. And you'll see this, some horses when you bring them in, you'll see this with some of the school horses. If they come in and they're the first one and they're alone, they will display some of these behaviors. Our last behavior, number 5, is called alliomimetic. And in the middle of that mimetic or mimicry tells you what this behavior is, right? So it's horses mimic each other. One does a behavior and you'll see the other ones look to the first horse and copy that behavior. Particularly with young horses, they will imitate the older horses, which is how they learn how to exist and function in their world. An example of this, if you want to picture like a herd of horses, they're all grazing. One horse lifts its head and takes off. The entire herd will take off without knowing why, because they're mimicking that first horse that ran or displayed the flight response, which in the wild is a life-saving response, because if you're the last one to run, you're the first one to get eaten. So that's part of why horses do this mimicking behavior. In captivity, if we are like stalling horses, stalled horses will start to copy each other. If one knows it's feeding time and starts pawing, the other horses may start pawing without realizing that it's feeding time. They're imitating the first horse. So they will imitate each other. It's a little bit controversial whether or not they learn from each other, but it is proven that they do imitate the behavior of other horses. So, how do we manage horse behavior? If we were live in person in lab, we would talk about what kind of equine careers that you all want to go into. We talked a little bit about it in labs. So thinking about the particular career, if that's the track you're on that you want to go into, then what kind of behavior do you want to modify within your chosen career, right? And this will be somewhat individual, depending on what your career goals are, and those might change as you go through your 4 years at River Falls. There's a lot of opportunity to try different things at River Falls and get involved with clubs or organizations that can kind of broaden your scope of what's available in the equine industry. There are a lot of careers out there. Like, it's not just barn manager, horse trainer. There's a vast, wide world of things you can do within the equine industry to make a living within that kind of a career. So think about what you want to do and sort of how you might modify or manage horse behavior within the career that you want to choose. In general, moving on to this next slide, in general, modifying horse behavior, they've got this flight zone. So we said they're a fight or flight animal. There's a flight zone around every animal that has that instinct, and really around people too. Think about if someone comes directly towards you, especially now. They get very, very close to your face. At some point, if they're approaching you, you're going to get uncomfortable and back away. That's your flight zone. So when a person is outside of that flight zone, you'll look at them, you'll talk to them, you might extend your hand to shake their hand, especially pre-COVID. But when somebody moves inside that bubble, your comfort bubble or your flight zone, you have the instinct to step back and move away. The animal's no different. So when you are outside the flight zone of that horse, they'll look at you. They don't perceive you as a threat. Certain horses might watch you more closely. Cattle will watch you very closely because we tend not to interact with cattle. So a herd of cattle is a very good way to like observe how the flight zone sort of works. If you move inside that bubble, the animal will move away from you. So if any of you have ever done cattle work, you know that if you push in front of the midline, so on the shoulder or the head, they'll move backwards or turn away. And if you push behind the midline or towards the haunches or the hindquarters, the animal will move away from you. And we can use this to move herd animals around. You can use this if your horses aren't tame. You can observe this in horses if they want to run away from you. Hopefully all of yours will be more than happy to let you come and halter them in the pasture and you won't have to worry about it. But like I said, when you catch your horses, come up to them towards the shoulder so they can see you. Don't walk up behind them. It will push them away, or they won't be able to see you and they will react when they see you suddenly behind them. So now we're going to talk a little about how do we modify behavior. We know we want to. We know that as horse managers, and particularly trainers, if we can get the horse to perform the behaviors that we want, we will make more money when we sell the horse. We will have clients that want to come to us for training. So we'll have a business that will thrive. But how do we modify their behavior? And not talking about specific examples like if the horse does this, you modify it by doing that. But broadly speaking, we use classical and operant conditioning. And if you've ever had psychology, Psych 101, you've gone through this, it's very basic. So your classical conditioning is taking a behavior a horse does and putting a neutral link. And the best example of this in the horse world is clicker training. So you're going to create this association, right? A horse does a behavior. Let's say you want the horse to lower its head. So the horse lowers its head and you give it a treat. That is a direct link, like horse lowers head, I give it a treat. That's a reward that the horse likes because they like food. The neutral link would be the click of the clicker. So all by itself, if I click the clicker, the horse does not care. The only thing they might do is be afraid of it and run away. But they usually don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them. But if the horse lowers its head and I click and then I give it a treat, after repetition, the horse will start to associate the click with the treat. And now I've created a neutral link between lowering the head and getting a treat. So now I can use the click as a reward, even though in the beginning it meant nothing to the horse. I've put meaning behind that cue. So we're creating this association. The example given here is voice commands for gait changes. Like the horse doesn't know what trot means, but by reinforcing that when I say trot and then on the lunge line, I use my whip to get the horse to trot, now I'm creating a link with that word and that horse will start to associate the word with the gait that it's performing. So that's one way we can modify their behavior. We also use operant conditioning, especially when we're in the tack, right? Because you don't want to click and treat all the time. In the tack, it doesn't work. So we have to use operant conditioning. We're modifying by reinforcement or punishment. And punishment does not mean going after the horse with a whip or chasing them around or getting mad or backing them across the arena. It's a method used to extinguish behaviors we don't want. And on the next slide, when we get there, we will talk about the reinforcement versus punishment, positive and negative, and kind of how it all works. So before you can modify, you need to know what kind of behavior your horse is going to display. It says recognize the horse's need for social acceptance. So like the horse is also looking to be accepted by you, especially if you've determined that you are higher than the horse. That horse knows that you have control of its feet. The horse knows that you rank above it. Then you need to know what these behaviors are the horse is naturally going to display and how to reinforce those in a way that is not punishing the horse, but in a way that is respectful of the horse and teaching them how to offer the behavior to you again. So on the next slide, this is this wheel. This was the best image I could come up with, like I found to show you. So positive and negative does not mean good and bad. Positive means you add something and negative means you remove it. So negative is a word to say like, I took something away, like taking your leg aid off when the horse moves. That's negative reinforcement. So it sounds It sounds like it would be bad, but it's not. Anything that reinforces a behavior is going to increase the frequency, and anything that punishes the behavior is going to decrease the frequency. So you're trying to extinguish certain behaviors. The two biggest ones that we would use in horse training are positive punishment and negative reinforcement. And we'll look at that on the next slide. This might be something you want to look over. These PowerPoints and all these slides, this is what will be on your written exams. So definitely study all of this stuff. I know this takes me a little bit to kind of think about the positive and negative, makes your brain think one thing when it's not. Positive and negative does not mean good and bad. So for example, on this next slide, the tools for training, your positive punishment. Here's an example. So positive punishment is trying to influence a horse to quit doing a behavior. So you're doing something, you're adding something to discourage a behavior. So your horse is in the cross ties, it starts to paw. You clap your hands really loudly, make a loud noise, which is going to startle them into stopping the pawing. So you're adding the stimulus of clapping, and the horse stops because your action discouraged that behavior. And I'm not saying this is the way to get your horse to stop pawing or this is going to work, but like as a in the moment example, the horse paws, you add something, which is the noise, to get them to stop, and they stop because you discourage the behavior. That's the general principle of positive punishment, to get them to stop doing a behavior that you don't want. Negative reinforcement is something we use every single time we ride with our cues. So negative means taking something away, and reinforcement means rewarding the correct behavior, letting the horse know, yep, that's what I wanted. So you apply your legs at the girth to get the horse to move. And the horse responds by walking forward. The way the horse knows that was the correct response is because you take your aid away. You remove your leg aid by stopping squeezing or stopping the application of your legs to let the horse know, yep, that's what I wanted, that the horse has made the correct response. So you're taking away the application of that aid. You're taking away the squeeze or the bump with your legs to let the horse know it has done the right thing. That is something that we use in order to train horses. It is one of the biggest tools that we have in our toolbox, this concept of negative reinforcement. So when you add something like an aid, it's not necessarily painful to the horse. It shouldn't be painful, but it's maybe uncomfortable. It's something that gets them moving or gets them thinking about doing something different. And when they hit on the correct response, you take the aid away. So positive punishment, negative reinforcement, those are the two biggest operant conditioning tools that we use in training horses. So to use these tools as a rider, you have got to start from a balanced position. If you are not balanced in the saddle, you cannot apply your legs and then take them off when the horse does the correct thing if you're using your legs to hang on. So using these tools requires you to be very balanced in your neutral position and then be able to use your aids specifically from there. The more specific you can be with all of your aids, the more your horse will respond to your small aids, the higher of a level you'll be able to train your horse to, and the more success you will have. So your good riders have these three things. This is important. This will show up on your tests, probably all three of them, so study these. Your good riders have a good seat, and that is the first one. You have to have a good seat before you have good aids, which is the second one. And you have to have a good seat and the ability to use your good aids before you have good feel, which is the third one. So this order is also important. They're put in this order because on the very last slide, your good seat, balanced position in all gaits in the saddle. This is next week's topic, how to be balanced at all your gaits, where your body should be, how your body should move, what your different body parts should do independently of each other. So you're moving with the horse and maintaining your core strength. We'll go way more into depth on this next week. And in your first mounted labs, when you first get on the horse, this is what we're going to go over. How to find your balanced position. The less balanced you are, the more you flap around with your arms and your legs and you grip to hang on and you tip forward and backward when the horse moves, and you cannot be clear about what you're asking the horse to do. So your good seat is number one most important thing. Any program that starts little kids riding, this is the first thing they do. Try to get them into a good balanced position. They do a lot of lunge line work. They do no hands work, things to get those kids balanced on the horse so that they have a quiet, neutral seat position. The second thing is your good aids. So your good riders have a good seat and good aids, which means clear and effective. So clear means that you understand what you're asking and your body is able to clearly and effectively communicate that. If I want a leg yield and I want to put my left leg at the girth, I need to be able to apply only my left leg and only the calf of my left leg onto that horse's side and in a rhythm with that horse's motion. Our third and final thing is good feel, which is almost impossible to teach, but it is something that you will start to get on your own as you ride more. It's something a trainer or instructor can help you to find. And then as a rider, you have to make that leap into feeling it, because by the time I say it, it's too late and we've missed the moment. But I can help you, even in hindsight, know what was correct so that you can find it on your own next time. It's achieved through lots of hours, lots of years in the saddle, riding lots of horses. So hopefully in this class, we at least get you a good seat and good aids. We're also working on good feel, and that's something that you will move on to in your 261 and 268 classes. Moving on from your basic good seat, good aids, and getting into the feel category, which is the point at which you can start to become a trainer instead of just a passenger. Instead of thinking more about yourself, when you get into feel, now you're thinking more about the horse. And now we moved into the category of you as a horse manager, as an equine scientist, and you are adding value to the horse instead of letting the horse add value to you, right? So everybody starts off thinking only about themselves because we have to. That's how we learn. That's how we get a good seat. That's how we learn to move with the horse. That's how we learn how to post the trot and sit the canter and do our 2-point and have an elastic connection through your elbows. That's all your basics. And you need a good horse to teach you that. River Falls has quite a few good ones that I think allow you to practice on yourself without worrying about their behavior. Once you have that, then you can learn how to apply those different parts of your body clearly and effectively. And when all that comes together, you move beyond letting the horse pack you around and you move into being able to influence the horse. So our lectures will cover a lot of these things. Our lectures will move into the feel category, the training category. But we'll start at the beginning with your seat and your aids. And then depending on the experience that you bring to this class in your labs, will help you move through these three sort of phases of becoming a good rider, starting at wherever you are. So if you're starting at the beginning, fantastic. And if you're starting somewhere partway through, great. We can help you through horse selection and through some of our exercises, move into feeling some of these changes and being able to influence the horse to have a better shape. So there's your lecture for the second week. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or talk to me next week in labs.